was released. I think that the Greeks, who were, by the way, marvelous to us. I spent one night in Athens and got caught up in these demonstrations. I got off the metro when I got from the airport, and I couldn't get out of the metro station because I didn't even know what this was all about. Thousands of people there, and they've been there for days. I couldn't get a taxi because the taxis couldn't get anywhere near, so I had to walk a long way anyway to find a hotel. And the next day, I took the overnight ferry to Crete, and that was it. I did not meet Yonatan. I met some of my friends there before I left. And so we were in Crete. We were all of us quite separated from each other. I didn't see the boat for several days. It was all under wraps. And one day suddenly they said, okay, we're all going to the boat, and we did that. But we had very little, I had very little contact with the American boat or with any of the other boats. My boat, by the way, was the Canadian boat, but we called it the ABCD group because it was a coalition of Australians, Belgians, Canadians, and Danes. We had one German, and we had a couple of Turkish guys, not people from the Mavi Marmara, but they came on late. And we had one Israeli, we had a mirror. And so anyway, it was known as the Canadian boat. What happened with this coalition, I think, was there were one small countries that couldn't really get a boat, but they wanted to go on the flotilla, so they supported, they helped raise funds, and the Greek boat was also a Swedish boat, and that was the way that was done. So we were in Crete, and it was very, very, very hot. We thought we would only be there a couple of days, but it was much, much longer. And the same thing as Yonatan said, every day there was a new demand. We didn't have enough cots for people, and we said, yes, we do, but they said, yeah, but they're not really wide enough, and you don't have air conditioning, you have to change your radio, so we changed the radio, and they wanted to see all of the original paperwork, and every time anything was produced, then we waited another day or two, and then they would come forward with something else, and it became very clear, as I think it did to everybody, that it wasn't about papers and air conditioning and the width of the beds. It was a decision that had already been made. They were no way going to let us go. And of course, cynically, we just didn't think for one moment that the Greeks had anything much to do with it, except that the Greeks were in a very bad situation. Clearly, they were desperate. The people were striking. They were rioting. The taxis were on strike a couple of days when I was in Crete, and we would read on the internet about what was happening, particularly in Athens. And individually, the Greeks were very, very sympathetic toward us. But they were in a bind, and the Greek government really had a lot bigger things to worry about than these little boats. And I think the pressure, we felt that the pressure they were coming under from the Israelis, particularly the Americans on behalf of the Israelis, was just too much for them. And so we really did understand them. We didn't think they had much choice in the matter. We we heard that the Americans had made a run for it, and that the captain, who was the same captain that was the captain of the Free Gaza when Kathleen and I went in 3 years ago, had been arrested, American John Blusmeyer, and so we knew about that. A couple of days later, we decided also to make a run for it, and it was exhilarating when it happened, but it was quite fun because everybody was sitting around, feeling very discouraged because it seemed like nothing was ever going to happen and that boat was never going to move. We spent a lot of time on the boat and it was lovely, but we weren't going anywhere. And then we had a Greek captain. The captain on our boat was the captain of the other boat, the Liberty, on our first journey that Kathleen and I took. So he was Greek, and we didn't want to risk his license or his livelihood, his freedom. So we had people on our boat. We had 5 men on our boat, all of whom had some kind of experience sailing boats or navigating, or we had a marine engineer who had been on the Mavi Marmara last year. And so the 5 of them took a little bit of instruction from our captain and decided that they knew enough to be able to take the boat. So the captain left the boat, and we were all sitting around lounging on the boat, being watched very carefully by the Coast Guard, because as soon as the American boat took off, we had a huge Coast Guard vessel that was attached to us, and wouldn't leave our side, and we also had Coast Guard and police parading up and down in front of us all the time. So we just sat there looking very nonchalant, as if nothing was going to happen, and all of a sudden our engine started and we took off. We also had a couple of our passengers, a young Australian fellow and a girl from Belgium, who got into kayaks, and as soon as we took off, they created interference between our boat and this enormous Coast Guard vessel. And the little Coast Guard, they were quite taken by surprise, and they eventually they boarded us. They boarded our boat, unlike the American boat. It was quite scary, really, even though we knew they weren't going to hurt us, but they came on board with guns and their camouflage outfits, and they were pushing people aside and quite upset with us. But however, by the time they got to the wheelhouse, there was nobody in there. The boat was on automatic pilot. Our captains had all left the wheelhouse, and the word went around while they were already on the boat. The word went around that if they ask you who is the pilot, you say, "I'm the pilot." So they couldn't arrest anybody. They arrested the two youngsters in the kayaks. They did ultimately arrest Sandra, who was the registered owner of the boat, who was the organizer, and we all went to court a few days later, and they did get I think they were given 6 months suspended or something. It was all quite, yeah, it was interesting. So anyway, we also took off. I think we were out for like 30 minutes or so, and we knew we wouldn't get to Gaza, and they eventually boarded, and they stopped us, and we turned around, and but unlike the American boat, we felt we were under boat arrest. They said, if you get off, you can't get back. We could have left, we couldn't get back, so we all stayed on board, and it was really quite cute because we couldn't leave, and at one point, the Coast Guard guys walking up and down said, your pizza's here. People were delivering pizza to us, and they were very, very friendly toward us, so we knew that they were not hostile, they were just doing their job. So really, I was there for a little over 2 weeks, and finally when we realized we weren't going to be able to leave, we started to leave, and Amira Lesser was able to get on that little Canadian boat, and I agreed completely with Yonatan. It was, we considered it, all of us considered it a total success. The story just wouldn't die, and the longer they kept it up, the more news it made. And then when they had the flotilla, which was nothing to do with us, but came right after, that kept it going. And then, God bless that little boat that went out there all by itself, and then the way the Israelis reacted, which of course was totally out of proportion, and so we would have loved to go to Gaza. We were certainly ready to be boarded by the Israelis, abused, beaten, robbed. It must have been quite disappointing, I think, for those some of those people, those commandos, who must have done quite well last year, because they actually stole an incredible amount of money from all those passengers, and stole a lot of computers. I think one soldier was charged with selling laptop computers that they took from passengers. I'm sure the charges were dropped. They used credit cards of friends of ours. They used telephones, mobile phones that they took. They stole everybody's camera, everything of value they took away from everybody. So I think that, I'm sure there was disappointment there, because the pickings from that little tiny French boat couldn't have been that great for them. So I do feel a little sorry about that. But however, we really felt that it was a success, and where we go from here, I don't know, but I'm up for it.